Hello and welcome to today's video review. Today we're going to continue our lead into Avengers Endgame with Marvel's Phase 2 films and discussing whether they are plot or character development. Consider this your warning. There will be major spoilers ahead for Iron Man 3, Thor: The Dark World, Captain America: The Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy, Avengers: Age of Ultron, and Ant-Man. I will go ahead and put timestamps in the description below for each of the films, but we will be essentially looking at Iron Man 3 as character development, Thor: The Dark World as character development with a little bit of plot development, Captain America: The Winter Soldier as character development with a little bit of plot, Guardians of the Galaxy as equal character and plot development, Age of Ultron as equal plot development and character development, and Ant-Man as character development. So let's go ahead and start with Iron Man 3. This film takes place in the months following the Avengers, and Tony Stark essentially stopping an alien invasion. He begins to suffer PTSD, and while he is unable to sleep, he designs and builds Iron Man armors Mark 8 through 42, which he eventually names the Iron Legion. After a number of terrorist attacks, one ends up leaving a friend of his hospitalized, and he gives out his home address, which results in an attack on it. During the attack, Jarvis sends him to Tennessee and then essentially disappears, I'm guessing because his mainframe was at the house that was attacked. After doing some investigative work on the terrorist attacks and repairing his Mark 42 armor, Stark finds himself in Miami, and in a plot twist that the Mandarin is not really the Mandarin. The Mandarin is an actor who is being told to do things by Aldrich Killian. And Killian wants to essentially own the war on terror with the U.S. government in one hand and the Mandarin in the other. Tony eventually stops his plans, and during this ending, he destroys his Iron Legion, no longer has PTSD, has shrapnel removed from his heart, and he throws away his arc reactor. All of this essentially wipes away Iron Man's 2 and 1 because the shrapnel is basically a character flaw for him. It helps keep him human, so to speak. And we're just meant to move forward. He's got no reason to be Iron Man anymore. He's told Pepper that he loves her and wants to essentially destroy the suits for her. But as he throws the arc reactor into the ocean, he says, "I am Iron Man." As you can see, this is solely on Tony Stark, solely character development for him, and that would be the only reason it would connect to the overall plot of the Infinity Stones. Next is Thor: The Dark World, and this film picks up roughly 2 years after the events of Avengers, with Thor having been out across the nine realms, stopping invasions from a marauding band of thieves. Loki is himself captured in an Asgardian prison cell. We pick up with Jane in London, who finds a liquid weapon called the Ether. Thor realizes she's disappeared for a hot second, which is when she picks up the Ether, and once he sees her face to face, realizes something's wrong, takes her to Asgard. Jane finding the Ether awakens the Dark Elves, who want to use the Ether to essentially destroy reality and return the cosmos to darkness. They're led by Malekith, and they eventually attack Asgard. During the attack, Frigga, Thor and Loki's mom, is killed by, I want to say his name's Algrim, basically Malekith's number 2 in command. Thor, in his grief and anger, frees Loki and decides to take Jane, who still has the ether in him, to the dark world, the dark elf's home, in a attempt to not only destroy the ether, but to draw out Malekith and destroy him as well. This fails, and Malekith is powered by the ether. So Malekith ends up going to Earth and uses an astrological event called the Convergence to try to destroy reality as we know it. Thor uses the help of Jane, Eric Selvig, Darcy, and Darcy's intern Ian to stop Malekith and retrieve the ether. We do find at the very end of the film that Loki survived the attack on the Dark World and somehow has replaced Odin on the throne of Asgard. During the mid-credit scene, we find Sif and Volstagg taking the ether to a man known as the Collector. And it's during this scene that we find that the ether was the Reality Stone and that the Tesseract is the Space Stone, and that it's a bad idea to put 2 of the Infinity Stones side by side in the same place. The fact that we are using the ether here as the Reality Stone leads it to plot development, but since the Power Stone, not the Power Stone, but since the Reality Stone's power kind of changes a little bit as we get into Infinity War, I feel that this film is more character development and not necessarily needed leading into Infinity War and Endgame. But the arc of Thor and Loki is purely character development, of course, but it helps see where they are at come Avengers and Thor Ragnarok. Now we have quite possibly the best made film of the phase, Captain America the Winter Soldier. Now before we get into talking about the plot, I want to ask this one question for everyone who has seen this film, and go ahead and respond in the comments below. But is Steve and Sam, during the opening jogging scene, are they running the same route with Steve just so fast that he can constantly pass Sam? Or is Steve just being mean to Sam and running just far enough out of his eyesight and double back and then say, on your left? I don't feel like that would be something Steve would do, as that's rather rude. Just completely and utterly mean. But of course this film, it really is the start of the disillusionment that Captain America has with the American government. And it starts right off the get-go with the Lumerian Star, and this has Black Widow looking at data files that Captain America has no idea she's doing. She was given a special mission by Nick Fury, but it jeopardizes Captain America's mission because he had no idea what it was, yet he is meant to be running this operation. Black Widow does end up gaining this data and bringing it back to Fury, who checks it and realizes he can't get into it, so he asks for a hold on what is known as Project Insight. And these are essentially upgraded helicarriers based from Tony Stark's time near them in the Avengers. After Fury is attacked, he ends up going to Steve, which ends up starting this chain of events that leads Steve being hunted by S.H.I.E.L.D. Steve and Widow end up at the military camp where Steve was trained during World War II, where they end up finding an old bank of computers that houses the consciousness of Arnim Zola. Zola ends up showing Steve and Natasha that Hydra has infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. years and years ago, and that they start to grow while planting the seeds for the human population to essentially give up their freedom. This revelation actually turns out to be a stalling tactic as a missile destroys the base but does not kill Steve and Natasha. They go to the only place that they know they can go, which is Sam Wilson's house. After interrogating Jasper Sitwell, they end up attacked on a freeway by the Winter Soldier himself. This ends up probably the best action sequence in this film, and we find out that the Winter Soldier here is Bucky Barnes. And I do have one question about this film, this fight scene itself. If you are holding a minigun attacking Captain America, why are you constantly shooting at his shield when he's standing on his feet, when you should be shooting at his ankles, trying to cut his feet out from underneath him? Every time I've seen this film, I genuinely don't understand why that guy is not shooting at his legs. It just makes the most sense to me. Eventually they do get away from the Winter Soldier and Hydra agents to find that Nick Fury is actually still alive. During the conversation with Nick Fury, we find that Bucky has been brainwashed, and he is constantly being frozen and awakened, kind of like Steve was, but Steve only was frozen once. But this is what keeps the Winter Soldier essentially a ghost story. During the conversation with Nick Fury, Cap decides that they're going to completely destroy Project Insight, and him, Sam, Maria Hill, the whole group go to the Triskelion to destroy the helicarriers. Here they're confronted by the Winter Soldier along with other members of Hydra. It does eventually lead to the fall of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Hydra within it. Steve refuses to kill Bucky, and then they fall from the helicarrier, where Bucky pulls him from the river and then disappears. The very end of the film has Black Widow testifying to the Senate and releasing all of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s files to the internet, which I'm pretty sure she didn't. Well, if she did, some of them are probably heavily redacted based on what we see with Captain Marvel, which we'll talk about when we discuss Phase 3. But Fury is shown to continue his death, basically letting everyone believe he's still dead. And Steve and Sam decide that they're going on a hunt for Bucky. This is essentially character development, but there is a little bit of plot in it with the fall of S.H.I.E.L.D., even though we don't have any mentions of Infinity Stones or anything like that. Now, there is one thing I do want to ask, I want to bring forward right here after mentioning Captain Marvel. Within this film, a character by the name of Alexander Pierce and Steve Rogers himself calls Nick Fury Nick. Within Captain Marvel, Fury states that no one calls him Nick or Nicholas, only Fury. It's the only thing he answers to. And it is that naming scheme where he can point out Skrulls. He does it to his boss. His boss calls him Nicholas, and he knows right away that he's a Skrull. But he allows Alexander Pierce and Steve to call him Nick when nobody else does. So this kind of leads me to believe that he might be a Skrull. And there's another moment in Age of Ultron that does as well. He's eating a sandwich that's cut diagonally, and in Captain Marvel he states that he can't eat toast if it's cut on a diagonal. It's got to be straight. So these two things together, watching this phase again, makes me think that Fury is possibly a Skrull. Now, I'm sure this theory has been mentioned in Reddit and in other places on YouTube, but I subscribe to it. I would not be surprised if we see Nick Fury being a Skrull at the end of Endgame or sometime within Phase 4. Maybe even within Spider-Man Homecoming. One more thing about Endgame. We see that Falcon here is a leader of a group of vets trying to help them come back to civilian life. And I wonder if that is kind of where they were going with Steve at the Survivors meeting during the Super Bowl trailer for Endgame. Just a thought and something I noticed while watching Winter Soldier. But with that said, let's go ahead and get into Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, Guardians of the Galaxy, it actually holds a special place in my heart. It was the first film that me and my wife saw as a married couple, and we used Hooked on a Feeling as our first dance based on the first trailer of Guardians of the Galaxy. So this movie holds a lot of weight emotionally for me. But when we talk about the film itself, the intro really set the tone. It perfectly showcased Quill with his his little dance, not really taking anything seriously, but seriously at the same time, and the kind of music style that we get within the film. We get all this during his exploration of Morag in search of what is called the Orb. This leads him to try to sell it on Xandar, where he gets into a fight with Rocket Raccoon, Groot, and Gamora. They all are captured by the Nova Corps and sent to the Kiln. It's in the Kiln where they meet Drax the Destroyer, but eventually they do escape and head to Nowhere, where they go to find the Collector to sell them the orb. The Collector explains to them what Infinity Stones are and that the orb houses the Power Stone. He doesn't call it the Power Stone, but by the way it reacts to using its power and the way he describes what is going on with the Power Stones, how they're used and things like that, it's heavily implied during the film that it's the Power Stone. Drax, while not caring about the stone, calls Ronan, the film's villain, because he killed his family. And it's Ronan's landing on Nowhere that really kind of breaks the team apart, if they're really not even a team at this point. He essentially kills Drax, leaving him for dead. Ronan's compatriot Nebula, who is Gamora's sister, leaves her for dead in space. And Peter Quill decides to save Gamora and then call his mentor Yondu to save them. Eventually, Quill is able to convince Yondu to help him get the Power Stone back from Ronan, though it is agreed that Yondu would end up with the stone afterwards. During their conversation, we find Ronan taking the Power Stone and putting it into his Warhammer, the Cosmorod, and talking to Thanos, saying he no longer needs him and that he was going to end up killing Thanos. Ronan then heads to Xandar, and the Ravengers, led by Yondu, and the Nova Corps try to stop him from making planetfall. Quill, Gamora, Rocket, Drax, Groot, they all land on the ship and take the fight to Ronan. They're unable to stop him. He blows up the Nova Corps fleet and essentially crash lands his ship. During the crash, Groot scoops up Rocket, Gamora, Quill, and Drax and sacrifices himself to save their lives. So once they're on the ground, Ronan is about ready to use the Power Stone on the planet. But Quill decides that he's going to basically do a dance-off to distract him, while Rocket rebuilds the Hadron Enforcer, and Drax uses it to end up destroying Ronan's hammer. The stone flies out of it, Quill grabs it, and with the help of the rest of the Guardians, Gamora, Drax, and Rocket, is able to harness the power and kill Ronan. He then tricks Yondu into not taking the orb and gives the orb to the Nova Corps. This act ends up giving the Guardians a new lease on life, brings them closer together, and it resets their criminal history. It's during this point that Quill also finds out that he's more than just an Earthling. His father is quote unquote something ancient, and Yondu makes mention that his father is quote unquote a jackass. And as you can see, Thanos and the Power Stone makes this film very much plot development, but it also brings you the formation of the Guardians of the Galaxy and starts bringing them together as a family, also making it a big character piece. So it's a little bit both. A little bit of both. This brings us to Avengers: Age of Ultron. Now this film starts with the Avengers attacking a Hydra base in Sokovia that is run by Baron von Strucker. They also meet his enhanced medical experiments that he calls the twins, which are Wanda and Pietro Maximoff. During this battle, they end up getting back the scepter that was stolen after Avengers, but Wanda gives Tony a vision of dying Avengers and another Chitauri invasion. This leads Tony to take the staff back to Avengers Tower and try to use it to help create an AI peacekeeping program that he called Ultron. During a party, the Mind Stone within the scepter merges with Ultron, essentially creating a disgruntled AI that tries to kill Jarvis. During the party, we have one of the best scenes of the film, probably the best scene, which is the Avengers sitting around talking with a doctor by the name of Helen Cho, and just about everyone tries to lift Thor's hammer Mjolnir. And the only one that even can remotely move it is Steve Rogers, but it's very little. Right after they try lifting the hammer, Ultron comes up in a destroyed, pieced together body of one of Stark's drones and essentially steals the scepter. After stealing the scepter, the Avengers are kind of left at a loss because the computers are wiped and they don't know how to look for Ultron. They find that Ultron is going to try to buy vibranium from a man that Tony knows named Ulysses Claw. This leads them to Africa right after Ultron buys what he is told is billions of dollars worth of vibranium. This leads to another battle that also has the Maximoff twins in it, in which Wanda mind controls and gives visions to everyone but Tony and Hawkeye. The Hulk ends up going on a rampage because of his vision, and with everyone down, Stark has to use his Veronica satellite platform to call forth the Hulkbuster armor. This leads to a battle in the city of Johannesburg, South Africa, essentially leveling the city and leaving the Avengers nowhere to go. This leads Hawkeye to take them to his farm, where he introduces them to his family. Thor says that he needs to find a way to revisit his vision so that he can try to figure out what is being shown to him. While on Hawkeye's farm, Tony and Steve debate the finer points in why Ultron was good or bad and what they need to do as a team. Eventually, they realize that Helen Cho was there when Ultron first attacked and that she wasn't killed. So they end up going to Seoul, South Korea, at least I believe that was the city that they went to, and to check on her when they find that Ultron is already there using part of the vibranium to create himself a new body. He uses the scepter to mind control Helen to helping her, and ends up breaking the scepter, revealing the Mind Stone within it, placing it in the body of the vibranium body. Wanda reads the mind on the vibranium body and finds out that Ultron's going to try to destroy the world, completely eradicate life on it. And she decides to help the Avengers, who shortly show up, and a chase ensues through the town. The Avengers end up capturing the body, but at the same time, Ultron kidnaps Black Widow. The body goes to Tony, who decides that he wants to talk Bruce Banner into putting Jarvis into this body because he found Jarvis was constantly stopping Ultron from using nuclear codes. This is what forced Ultron into buying the vibranium and wanting to destroy the planet, basically by picking up a big chunk of Earth and crashing it into the planet. This leaves Captain America very upset when he enters the room with the Maximoff twins. It's a little scuffle while they debate whether it's a good idea. Thor flies in, supercharges the body, and basically brings Vision to life. He calls him his Vision, and yet they try to reason and debate with Vision on if he's Ultron, something more, or something different. And while they say that it's going to happen soon, they really don't follow Vision until he picks up Thor's hammer Mjolnir and hands it to him. At that point, they all decide that they're going to go to Sokovia and battle Ultron. During this battle, they free Black Widow, and they have a big giant fight with robots. There's one line in particular where Wanda Maximoff is starting to break down. She doesn't know if she can do it. Hawkeye looks at her and says, "None of this makes sense. We're in a floating city," because this is where Ultron is trying to lift up the area. And we're fighting. He says, "We are in a floating, none of this makes sense. We're in a floating city fighting a group of robots. And I have a bow and arrow." I loved it. I thought it was funny, and it fit Hawkeye. And this is the moment where Wanda decides that she's an Avenger and she's going to help destroy Ultron. Eventually, the battle is starting to wind down, and they're finishing evacuation with help of Nick Fury, War Machine, and Helicarrier, where Hawkeye is saving a child and Ultron has stolen a Quinjet, and he does a strafing run towards Hawkeye, and Quicksilver essentially runs in the path of bullets, saving Hawkeye but dying in the process. The Avengers have fully come together at this point. They've destroyed every body of Ultron, and Tony Stark has found a way to stop essentially at this point it's a meteorite, from destroying the Earth. After the battle, Hawkeye goes back to his farm. The Hulk disappears. Thor returns to Asgard in search of the remaining Infinity Stones, but he says that essentially because Vision could lift the hammer, that the Mind Stone is safe in his head. Stark has agreed that he's no longer an Avenger, and Cap and Black Widow decide to train the new group of Avengers, which include Vision, War Machine, Falcon, and a Scarlet Witch, or Wanda Maximoff, who actually, I like the outfit she wears at the very end, but her face kind of looks really weird. Like the makeup she had on for that final scene was in complete contrast in what she had on for the rest of the film. But as this film is about the Avengers, it's major character development. It is also major plot development, as it deals with not only the team dynamic, but the Mind Stone, and Thor starting to realize that something's going on with these Infinity Stones and that they're being played. So in that aspect, it's equal character and plot development. But of course, this leads us to our final film, Ant-Man. Now, Ant-Man has a prelude in it that is set in 1989 and essentially shows Hank Pym quitting S.H.I.E.L.D. But the film properly begins with Scott Lang getting out of prison, working at Baskin-Robbins, getting fired at Baskin-Robbins because he used a fake name and essentially fake papers, I would guess. But his friend Lewis tries to convince him to do a thieving job, and he declines. But then we see Hank going to a presentation about Darren Cross, his old protege, essentially digging up his pin particle formula and kind of reconstructing it, and says he's going to sell it as part of a war suit, kind of like Iron Man. Well, he gets compared to Iron Man, but he doesn't take well to it. But he calls it the Yellow Jacket. Hank mentions to his daughter Hope that they need to steal it soon, and they talk very briefly about how they should go about it. Hank mentions that they don't need to use Hope in the suit. We then go to see Scott is a father, and he's at his daughter's birthday party, but gets thrown out because, well, he's an ex-convict, and he's got no job, he's not paying his child support, and he's sleeping on some dude's couch. This ends up upsetting Scott to the point where he'll agree to do the job, which is essentially break into Hank Pym's house. He steals the Ant-Man suit, and during his first run decides he wants nothing to do with it, and gets arrested while returning the suit. While he's in jail, Hank Pym essentially says, I'm going to give you a second chance. Do you want to be in jail, or do you want to come with me? Breaks him out of jail, and then starts to train him as Ant-Man. During this time, Darren Cross, the old protege of Hank Pym, finds out how to shrink bioorganic matter. It's this discovery that pushes the heist up a little bit, and the stress of training Scott forces Hank to tell Scott and Hope exactly how Hope's mother Janet died. How she fought alongside him as the Wasp, shrank between molecules of an ICBM, and was never seen. She was just so small that she died. Eventually, after being told this information, they decide they have to steal a old part from Hank from an old upstate New York. After this revelation, they find that they need a part from an old SHIELD facility that actually turns out to be the new Avengers facility. Ant-Man gets into a fight with the Falcon, steals the part, and goes home to kind of give them the part. It's during this little conversation that Darren shows up out of the blue, talks to Hank, says he's going to end up tripling security at the unveiling and the selling of the Yellow Jacket armor, and this forces Hank, Hope, and Scott to bring in Scott's friend Luis and the group that they stole the Ant-Man armor from. I'm gonna call it armor now. It's not. It's a suit, but I think we're just gonna call it Ant-Man armor. Eventually, the heist ends up going well, until it comes time to destroy the Yellow Jacket armor. Darren knew what they were doing, and he shoots Hank. Hank doesn't die, but it really starts this battle where Scott ends up chasing Darren. Hank is carrying around a tank on a keychain, and him and Hope use that to escape. Scott ends up following Darren to a helicopter. They have a little bit of a fight inside the helicopter, and Scott falls out. He's holding on to a seatbelt, and well, Darren got in the Yellow Jacket armor. Leads to a fight where they eventually end up in a suitcase, fall out of the helicopter, and we have a scene that basically has Ant-Man getting up out of a pool. He has a table tennis paddle, and he hits Yellow Jacket towards a bug zapper, and then promptly gets arrested. The bug zapper doesn't kill Darren Cross, so he decides that he's going to hurt Scott the only way he knows how, which is to attack his daughter. Fight ensues in Cassie Lang's bedroom, but Scott can't beat him. So he decides that he's got to shrink between the molecules and essentially destroy his suit from the inside out. So he ends up going subatomic, entering the quantum realm. Time and space just kind of distort, but he doesn't know what to do. He finds one of these blue discs that Hank teaches him to throw to make things big, and ends up coming out of the quantum realm. This eventually gives Hank hope that he can bring back Janet. Saving Cassie also brings Scott back into Cassie's life and brings that whole family unit closer to Scott himself. As you can see, after talking about this film, this is purely a character piece. This has very little to do with Infinity Stones, absolutely nothing actually, but there's a possibility that after seeing Endgame we might go, you know, that quantum realm stuff, that ended up being really important, but we really won't know until we see Endgame. With all that said, Phase 2 was kind of up and down. It had some low points in Iron Man 3, Thor the Dark World, and a little bit of Age of Ultron, but it had some really good high points with Captain America Winter Soldier and Guardians of the Galaxy. What did you guys think? Go ahead and leave me a comment below and tell me what you think about this phase down in the comment section below. And if you want to go ahead and talk to me about Nick Fury possibly being a Skrull in the future, go ahead and hit me up at my social media. The links will be in the description below. And as always, make sure to like, share, and subscribe this video. And until next time, have a great night.